In our main passage, 1 Kings chapter 14, verses 1 through 20, and also Proverbs 18:14. We read that, and through that, we want to have the title, Physical Illness and the Illness of the Heart. All of the problems have the principle of rooted from the heart. When you have physical sickness, you can just be buried into the earth. But the problem of the spirit, you go into the fire and brimstone. You just totally get destroyed and perish, physically and spiritually. Now the Lord said that we have illnesses because of sin. John chapter 5, verses 1 through 14. There was a person who was ill for 38 years in Bethsaida. And there was a pool there. And they would swirl it around. And if you go in there first, and whatever illness there was, you would get healed. But there was no one to help him. Help this that person who was alone. For 38 years he was ill. Everyone else would go in. He could not get up. He could not walk. And he was just laying down on the portico of the Solomon's temple. And as the Lord passed by, he saw the man who was ill for 38 years. And it says that he knew that he had been sick for a long time. And as he said, he says, before I go into the pool, everyone goes in there before I do. He said, do you wish to get well? And the sick man answered, yes, I want to become healed. This was a Sabbath day. And on the rules of the law of the Sabbath, you cannot work on the Sabbath and go out of the boundaries. If you work on the Sabbath without even going to the courts of the judge, you just take them out of the city, you take all of the people, and they stone them to death. This is the law of the Sabbath. And in today's words, the congressmen or the people of the officers of the General Presbytery, they were looking on to see if he would heal on the Sabbath. He's Satan. And he's the demon possessed. He's the queen of all demons. Imagine saying that. He is a demon of demons. They looked at Jesus. He said, oh, he's full of Beelzebub. And he's received that spirit and healing people. And therefore, does my word have authority to forgive sins or not? Now, he was sick for 38 years. When a person's healthy and then gets sick, if you lay down for 1 month and then try to walk and stand, they try and they get all dizzy because they laid down for so long. It's like as they're dizzy from being drunk. And they just go back and forth and staggering because they're dizzy. But this man who had been sick for 38 years, he had not walked or even stood up. And what did the Lord say? He says, take up your mat and get up. And secondly, he said, walk. And he walked. And then the Lord met the patient again. Before you get sick even worse, do not commit sin. And this is John chapter 5, verse 14. And so the heart of the sickness of the heart is sin. It's just so frustrating. Now, if we look at Proverbs 15, although a person is cheerful, they may have a sorrowful heart. It is a sickness of the heart. If you look at verse 17, chapter 17:22, I'll read it for you. A joyful heart is good medicine. A joyful heart is good medicine, but a broken spirit dries up the bones. It says the bones dry up and wither away. And Proverbs 15:4 is the same thing. If you have worries and concerns, if you look at the original language, and it's like a cold. All of the origins of sicknesses starts from colds, and worries and concerns are the same things. Physical sickness can be healed, and it's hard to heal the sickness of the heart. It's hard to heal that. Now in Judah, Israel, there were two prophets. One did not have a name. It just had no name. Anonymous. And then there was another one, Abijam. When we look at the Chronicles and the history of it, I'll read it. Listen carefully. Now, God appeared to Solomon twice in a dream. And he said, I appeared to you in a dream twice. 1 Kings 11:19. You did not obey. David touched a woman once, and other than that, he had no sin. That the Bible records it like that. God said that. God said that David had no other sin except that one time he touched that woman. The Bible records as God saying that. And look at King David. He had the revolt by his third son Absalom. It was like a coup. They're trying to kill him. And it was all out in the public. And he had relations. It was prophesied that his sons would have relations with his wives and concubines. It was public display of that. How scary is sin? And look at Samuel, 2 Samuel 17. And how much he was cursed because he even took Uriah. And if you look at Psalm 6, it said that he was repenting so much that the bed was full and wet of tears. That's how much he repented. And God said that story to Solomon. I appeared to you, Solomon, 2 times. And your dad, David. And walk in your ways of your dad, David. And you can have the blessings of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that will be poured upon you. And he was in that place. And those people led him away. And now let's look. This is just so frustrating. Now, Solomon took on the idols of other nations, of Moab and the other nations. And he was told to not even engage with them or to marry them. And Deuteronomy 7 says, do not have relations or with the unbeliever. They have a lot of wealth or they're powerful. They went to study overseas. Have you ever seen anything come well? The prophet Nehemiah talked about this. And he just cleared away and killed off all of the high priests who married Gentiles. And even all of the relatives, he just cleared them out totally. Read Nehemiah chapter 13 if I'm lying. And God said, even if they try to seduce you, do not marry them. This is God's wish. And what is the conclusion? I am a God of jealousy. Hey, listen, men and women. The husband does not sin, but they talk with a woman and they have coffee. Look at the wife. Oh, our husband is so lucky. The fire comes from her eyes. And she doesn't even make him dinner. And that's jealousy. And that's not in the perspective of goodness. God spoke this. The blessings of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and through Moses, I've said this. And he said 13 times, hey, you're throwing me away. You're taking all of those good things and throwing me away. When we look at the Bible, it just gets your heart all fervent and just fired up. This world is short. The marks just pass on. You're like a vapor, morning vapor. And there's nowhere to rest on this earth, and you just pass on. Even Moses said in Psalms 90, he said this a few times. It says to turn your hearts away from them and turn away all those idols. If you send your daughters off to unbelievers, there was many problems that come as a result of all these things. Hey, you went out to church when you were a young woman, but what's happening now? If you're going to come to my house, you have to follow my rules. Since our ancestors, we were Buddhist, that's our house. And we can see the problems arising being in a mixed marriage. What are you talking about going out to church? And so they had a divorce. She came out from Yonsei and she was so smart. Will that work out? Hey, who is Jesus? They just deny. And they just look down upon that with their eyes. That you have daughters-in-laws and daughters. And they said they don't need husbands or anything else. But after experiencing all of that, they just came out on New Year's and only Christmas. And I was there. And they were just on their knees just crying and weeping because of their situation of what happened to them. And she doesn't tell the pastor because they might get scolded by them. But she got married outside. And not many people of our church know about that. Solomon loved the Lord, but he had 700 concubines. And he actually formerly married with 300 women. And the wives turned the heart of Solomon. When we look at Song of Songs, chapter 8, it's about 600, 800 women. And look at 1,000 women. A year has 365 days. And when we look at the Bible, then what does it say? It says that took his heart away, and Solomon held to these in love. And he had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines. And his wives turned his heart away. And it came about when Solomon was old, his wife turned his heart away after one and other gods. And his heart was not wholly devoted to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father had been. For Solomon went after Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and the Milcom, and the detestable idol of the Ammonites. He committed a sin with his eyes in front of God. Solomon did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and did not follow the Lord fully. And they put detestable idols and worship altars in front of by the temples. He built high place for Chemosh, the detestable idol of Moab, on the mountain which is east of Jerusalem, and for Molech, the detestable idol of the sons of Ammon. That's also he did for all his foreign wives who burned incense and sacrificed to their gods. Now the Lord was angry with Solomon because his heart was turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice. This is in 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 9. We read from verse 1 through 9. And when God saw that, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, David, forget about everything. I'm going to just take everything down. And so he called the prophet Ahijah and make new clothes. And he made the new clothes. And when we look at the Bible, it says he wore that. And there was Jeroboam. And when we look at the passage in Second Kings chapter 11, and so Ahijah came and he wore the new clothes, and he ripped it and into 12 different pieces. And then he took 10 and gave it to Jeroboam. And one was given to the son of Solomon. And Ahijah the prophet prophesied that there were 12 tribes, but from now on you are the king. And then the prophet Ahijah made him the king. And he made the king, but however, he made the altars and he changed the date of the feast of the booths, and he took the army and he made a wall so that they couldn't worship. And he said those who want to worship, they would be killed. And so no one went to Jerusalem for the feast because they heard about that. And so only the Levites had the rights to become the high priest. And Kohath carried the holy articles. But that's so complicated to go through that. And other tribes didn't work out. Everyone has an allotment. But Levites are the ones who offer sacrifices. And they're taking upon the sins. And they're doing that role. And so they didn't have an inheritance. And the 10% that the people offered went to the Levites. And Levites lived off of the tithe. And even if they received that tithe, they tithed of the tithe and give it to God. And when we look at the Bible, King Rehoboam, he said, when is this going to happen? And he just did whatever he wanted. Forget about the Levites. They're canceled. And he picked people who listened to him and who followed in his ways and put them as high priests. And look at he erased the dates that were given by Moses. And instead of 7th month, he changed it to the 8th month for the feast. And God was so angry. His wrath was just exploding. Now let us read that. In 2 Kings 12. From 25. And you have to be able to know this. And more than the physical pain, how scary is the sickness of the heart? To hate people, that is a very scary illness. Jealousy, envy. Your bones rot. That's a very scary sin. And so, even if you went to church back and forth, if you do not know the Bible, that you say, oh, everybody has sickness in this world. Who doesn't have sickness? But now through the third service, now, I said, Pastor Yi Sing Sam to preach, and please believe that your family problems will be healed. Some church member came in front of Edom and they read that rock, you will have peace. And they read that through a heart of prayer. And they said, God, as the Lord resurrected, the disciples were scared. And they were in the room with the locked doors. He appeared to them and said, peace be with you in our family. Let it be like that. They prayed. And after 3 months, all of the 10 years of problems, as they prayed, it all fulfilled and it all resolved. I have that letter that they wrote to me. There's that kind of member in our church. Every time they see that, they read it with a heart of prayer. This is the word of the Lord. As he resurrected, the first word that he said was, may you have peace in your families, in your children, your workplace. They would pray like that. And say, oh, according to your faith, it will be done to you. I've experienced that. There's that kind of person. First Kings chapter 12, verse 25 and the following. Then Jeroboam built Shechem in the hill country of Ephraim and lived there. And he went out from there and built Penuel. And Jeroboam said in his heart, now the kingdom will return to the house of David if these people go up to offer sacrifices in the house of the Lord at Jerusalem, then the heart of this people will return to their Lord, even to Rehoboam, king of Judah, and they will kill me and return to Rehoboam, king of Judah. So the king consulted and made 2 golden calves, and he said to them, It is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Behold your God, O Israel, that brought you from the land of Egypt. And he set one in Bethel, and the other he put in Dan. Now this thing became a sin, for the people went to worship before the one as far as Dan. And he made houses on high places, and made priests from among all the people who were not of the sons of Levi. And Jeroboam instituted a feast in the 8th month, on the 15th day of the month, like the feast which is in Judah. And he went up to the altar, thus he did in Bethel, sacrificing to the calves which he had made. And he stationed in Bethel the priests of the high places which he had made. Now look at this. And so now he was the king. And do you think they would read the law of Moses? But these people just followed according to the king's commandments. And if you go to Jerusalem, they thought that they would turn away from him and kill him. And so he said high places in Dan and Bethel. And he said, these are the gods that led you. And he said, 7th month is wrong. And he changed it to the 8th month and 15th day. And when we saw that, we could see that God was just angry, wrath. And he's a God of jealousy. There was no name of the prophet, but the prophet received a revelation in Judah. He was an old prophet. And he said, go to Jeroboam. And he had to have a high priest from Levi tribe. But he just took an average person and did whatever he wanted and set him up in that place. In the place of the king, they obeyed him. And for example, they ordered they say, hey, sit down, stand up. And the king doesn't want that. Hey, I am the king here. I am ruling here. And hey, those Levites, I don't want to listen to their order of worship. And so he just took an average man and put him on the high priest. And they said, that was too complicated. Forget it. And I'm going to just do it myself. And because of that, the old prophet found and looked for Jeroboam. Now, let's read that. Let's read 1 Kings chapter 13. Before we leave this earth, you have to know this. How scary is the sickness of the heart. Unbelief is the sin that leads to death. How big is the sickness of the heart? Physical sickness, you just destroy. Physically, look at the thoughts, evil thoughts, murder and idolatry, hating, and all of those things in Matthew 7 and Matthew 15. And someone gets promoted and you just get disgusted in your stomach and you just try to look that down. Why are you doing things to put curses on your descendants? It is a sickness of the heart. And then you just come to ruin overnight, even if you succeed and go into the high places. In some presbytery. This is a true story in history. And he would just he collapsed all of a sudden, and he was a very young man, a little over 40, and he just could not stand. And they opened his stomach, and it was all just rotten. And they needed to operate, but how could they? God killed him that way. he was all rotten inside because he and he, those people who were in the Presbytery denomination officers for over 30 years, they know about this man. And they opened his stomach. It was just all completely rotten because of his actions and behavior that he committed. There was a king who had his stomach rotten as well in the Bible. So, jealousy. When we look at Proverbs 13, it rots the bones. How dangerous is jealousy? It rots the bones. Through the word today, physical sickness, sickness of the heart, it's so scary. You have to know about that. And it kills yourself. It destroys yourself. Look at Jesus, who wore the crown of thorns. He was beaten, and he couldn't even open his eyes because they were puffed out from being beaten. And he shed his blood. And in this process, he said, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. This was everlasting, unchanging agape love that we have received. And so when you look at this word, you have to hope and pray that other people do well, and don't say, oh, that person ruined me, he hurt me. Oh, you get hurt by that. They're enemy. Even though I die, I'm going to get them back. Or